reasonably confident about the robustness of this research until I just saw that last paper. And now I'm completely paranoid that everyone's going to be scrutinising it with in great detail. Yeah, I did this paper in collaboration with Kim Arnold, University of Wisconsin, Madison. Unfortunately, she can't be here today, but she's here in spirit and following everything on Twitter. Now, there's lots been written about ethics and privacy and various legal aspects of learning analytics. There was this special issue of the Journal of Learning Analytics last year, which is probably the biggest collection of papers in that area. There's been stuff in American Behavioural Scientist and various other places. And all these are looking at the ethical aspects. Very few papers actually look at what students think. So you'll find that whenever you go to a university, staff and faculty are incredibly concerned about ethical issues. And then if you talk to the students, as I have done and my colleagues have done in JISC in the UK, frequently we find that students aren't really that bothered. Now, I know this isn't the case at the OU, where Sharon and the other two speakers we've just had work. That's the Open University in the UK. But most institutions, when we talk to the students' union leaders and people like that and do sort of straw polls of students, they're quite happy about it. So we wanted to find out whether that was actually the case by doing a bit more formal research. These are 3 papers that have been written in the past about this area. And they come up with these general conclusions that, first of all, students understand that their data has inherent educational value. So they realise there must be something useful in it. And also, secondly, that the data suggests that many students are willing to share learning-related data, especially if it can help them in their studies. So we wanted to drill down a bit more and just commissioned a survey in the UK of a whole bunch of students to find out if that was the case. And then Kim took that survey and adapted it for her students, so the students in Wisconsin. Now, one of the things that I was involved in the UK was developing a code of practice for learning analytics. This was a literature review of all the ethical and legal issues. There's been lots of stuff written about this now. And out of that, I compiled a taxonomy of issues, found 86 different issues. Things like, if a student's allowed to opt out of data collection and analysis, could this have a negative impact on their academic progress? What should a student do if the suggestions are in conflict with their study goals? And how can institutions avoid overly simplistic metrics in decision-making which ignore personal circumstances? So again, this is all about the kind of ethical, legal, and actually many of these issues are logistical. So I categorise these as all primarily ethical, primarily legal, or primarily logistical. And out of that, we produced a code of practice in collaboration with the National Union of Students in the UK, which is helping to solve some of the issues that crop up in UK universities as learning analytics is rolled out. And at the Open University, they also have a student policy, an ethical use of data, student data policy. So you might want to look at those if you're trying to do something similar at your institutions and you don't have that yet. So this is the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I've got some great pictures from Kim about that wonderful-looking campus. This is what we did as far as the JISC survey was concerned. We had 406 students interviewed from across the 4 nations of the UK. Well, the UK still has 4 nations in it. Hopefully in the future it might be different. 50, not that I'm biased or anything. Most of these were from higher education, and we also have a sort of community college sector called Further Education in the UK, so we also interviewed those students. At the University of Wisconsin, they added Kim added very similar questions to what we did with JISC at the end of their semester user experience survey. And all of those students, a subtle difference here was that all of those students had had some experience in using learning analytics, a dashboard that was provided to them. And she had 509 responses in spring 2016 and 916 in fall 2016. So the first question, there were three basic questions that appeared on both of these surveys. First of all, would you be happy for data on your learning activities to be used if it kept you from dropping out or helped you get personalised interventions? Secondly, would you be happy for your data to be used if it helped to improve your grades? And thirdly, would you be happy to have your data visualised through an app where you can look to compare your progress with your classmates? And this is particularly relevant for us in the UK because JISC has developed a student app for learning analytics. We wanted to, after we decided we were going to develop one, wanted to actually see if students wanted one. Perhaps the wrong way around. Now, the results are here, and Simon is a very rigorous scrutiniser of research and pointed out to me that the graph in the paper for the conference doesn't tally with the figures, so I hastily redid the graph. The figures are right. But here's a quick scan, and you can see various things from here. So we've got, there's very small text here, but we've got JISC higher education, JISC further education, and the 2 semesters for University of Wisconsin. And those who are happy for it to be, for learning analytics to be used to help prevent them dropping out, you see the Wisconsin ones are fairly much more positive than the UK ones. Over 70% of them are happy for that. Now, I don't know if that says Americans are just generally more positive than the miserable people in the UK, but because it's kind of consistent all the way through. Or perhaps because they'd actually used a learning analytics application already, they were more familiar with it. I think that might be a factor as well. And very little difference really between the 2 groups. Oh, where did that come from? The 2 groups in these in each cohort, in each sector. So improving, and this was the one that was least popular. Would you like to compare yourself with other students? So only 25 or so % of the UK students were happy for that. But many more American students in Wisconsin were happy. Again, does that say Americans are more competitive than UK people? I don't know. But generally, all of these are reasonably positive, and in some cases very positive, except for the comparison of your grades with other students among UK students, I would say. Just quick summary. Overall, Wisconsin students seem to be more accepting of their learning activity data being used. The majority of UK and US students surveyed do not object to their data being used to help them improve their grades. And US students are much more interested in being able to compare their data through an app than UK students. So that's as far as the paper went. This is just supposed to be a brief research paper. And just to put a spanner in the works, just carried out a survey a couple of weeks ago, asking similar kind of questions, which are quite interesting. So they provided me with this data last week, and I thought I'd put it in here. And they surveyed, again by phone interview, 1,000 UK students. And they specifically asked about this activity tracking app and various questions about that. A lot of the students had used fitness apps on which these learning analytics apps are increasingly modelled on. 88% of them thought that an activity tracking app for learning teaching would be helpful, which is pretty huge. And 82% would actually use it themselves. 61% of higher education students would be happy to have their learning data collected if it stopped them from dropping out. So that's a bit higher than the last year's survey. 78% would be happy to have their learning data collected if it improved their grades. Again, that's gone up. And 60% of higher education students would be happy for tutors to collect their data if the tutors were concerned about their welfare. So that was a new question that was asked. And it's a lower percentage, but it's still quite interesting. So that's basically it. I say it was just a very brief paper. I was supposed to cram this into 10 minutes because we thought we had a shorter session, but we've got a bit of time for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Niall. Okay, floor's open. Let's have a few questions for Niall, and then because we may have a bit of time left, those who want to stay, we could possibly have a broader ethics discussion with all the speakers for those who'd like to do that till 2:30. Okay.
Yeah, I'll go for you first then you, yeah.
Just wanted to check the questions that you used there for the first survey, it was paper-based for the UK students?
No, it was actually phone-based interviews for the UK students, and it was either paper-based or online. I'm not sure for the Wisconsin students. I think it was online.
Right, it was just to see whether because the US students had experience of learning analytics before, maybe the UK students weren't as aware of what the terminology was around that area, and that might have resulted in lower results. I
think that's a strong possibility. I don't know if everyone could hear that, but I think it's quite likely that as students get more familiar with learning analytics and the fact that it's could be helpful to them and it's not actually that scary, and if they trust the institution to do it ethically and to look after their data, then we could see these percentages getting higher. And if it's just a sort of standard thing that they get, which they can use if they want it, then perhaps these objections will really be diminished. That's my expectation. Yeah.
Can you clarify what learning analytics experience the US students did have? Because it covers a huge range of things.
They were given a dashboard which said some things about their learning activities, and I'm not sure of the exact nature of that dashboard. But I know all the students that had answered that survey had experience of that dashboard.
Yes, my question was related to the previous one as well. I'm interested in that 88% that you mentioned in the previous slide.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering how you recruited these participants, whether there is a self-selection bias there, because maybe the medium by which you expose them to the survey make them already a bit more willing to say, yes, I'm up for this.
I think these students are selected from a panel of students who said they were willing to be interviewed. So there could well be but not necessarily about this issue, just about any issue. So there could well be a selection bias because the students that say they're prepared to be interviewed are more likely to be positive, perhaps in general, although not necessarily. Right, got a few there. Yeah, down there first, thanks.
Have you considered taking the study fees into account as a moderating variable for your results?
No, I haven't. So what do you reckon the impact of that might be? If I can throw that back at you.
The higher the fees, the more interested students might be in receiving all sorts of information to improve their study.
That's a good point. Now, the UK data was broken up into the 4 nations of the UK, and in Scotland students don't pay any fees, but in England they pay quite a lot, although not by US standards. So I'll have to go back and look at what that breakdown was, but yeah, it's a good point. You've got more at stake if you pay lots of money. John first, and then we'll go up here.
I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the way that students were selected. I mean, you've spoken a little bit to that, because I was wondering about the selection bias as well. But, and then second, just another on the follow-up on that suggestion that to determine these kind of potential confounding variables, to ask some of these questions right up front. Have you used technology? What are your fees? How far along are you in the program? Like those kind of things could help tease out whether the sample is representative, even if there's a bias detected.
Yeah, on the latter point, you're absolutely right, and this could be a much more rigorous study, and I think it just highlights that we need to do a lot more work in this area. But on how the students were selected, well, yeah, again in the UK there was a panel of students. I'm not sure how that panel is selected. And in the Wisconsin study, all students that did a particular set of courses were invited to answer the survey, and the majority of them did. The stats are in the paper of what percentage did actually respond. In fact, they're in this presentation. Does that help? Yeah.
In the first one, for 88%, what is an activity tracking app in this case? What does it actually track?
Well, the app that JISC has developed is it's a kind of like a fitness tracker for learning. So it tracks various different data sources, such as your use of the LMS, your attendance at lectures, your use of library facilities, and then it presents that back to you and allows you to compare yourself with the overall cohort and track your progress through that. Now, I don't know, because I was just presented with this last week, whether the students that responded to this set of questions were made fully aware of what that was, or whether they were just given this question. So again, we can't tell a huge amount from this, but I think we can tell that it's not overwhelmingly negative, if nothing else. Yeah.
A few slides back, you had this competitiveness, box.
Oh yeah. So I'll go back to that. That one. Yeah, compared with other students. Yeah.
What kind of students these UK students were? Who were these students?
These are higher education university students from across the UK and at different levels, and I've got that, I think it's in the paper, and further education students at college, and then all higher education students in Wisconsin.
Because we were discussing these issues, say, at the OU and also at the University of Leeds School of Medicine, and obviously there's a different competitiveness, because you are taking a different segment of society.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
So it leads.
No, it is fascinating. I mean,
absolutely happy to be competitive and compared.
Well, this is one of the arguments that people have reservations about giving students access to their own analytics, because they think that it could demotivate students.
Unlike in Leeds, where they said, give it to them.
Yeah, and yet highly competitive students, when you ask them what, or even the majority of students, when you ask them if they want this kind of thing, they say, yeah, I'd like to see how I'm doing in relation to my expectations, because there are very few data points during the year that you can actually find that out. But if it's continual progress check, a lot of students seem to find that of interest. There was one here, and then we'll go down there. Yeah.
Well, do you have a neutral option for student responses on the survey?
There was.
I'm interested what the difference was between neutral and disagreeing.
Yeah, if you look at the paper, you'll see a bit more detail. So there were some people that didn't respond to some of those questions. Yeah, good point. Scotty?
Yeah, so I was actually just curious as to what's next then after sort of this session, and where are you taking the surveys? Are you standardising it? Because I mean, I'd be interested in looking at how we could use this, say, in Germany, in the education system there, to see how maybe ready the students are for that kind of stuff, where learning analytics is really just starting out.
There's no definite plans to do anything further with it at the moment, but I'd be very interested to talk to you about that, and maybe we could develop some kind of standardised student attitude to learning analytics survey, and yeah, get in touch, anyone else that would be interested in that, and do another paper about this next year. Yeah. Sorry, did we have another down here? Right, over there, thanks.
Take one more question from Neil, and then let's just open it up. People may be seeing connections between the three presentations as well.
Yeah.
Looking at the comparative as far as, one is tempted to say that American students are inherent optimists.
Yes.
Students are inherent pessimists.
It could be.
You say you rolled out the tool. Have you gotten any feedback from students that if it has a comparative element? What are they seeing value in that?
Well, we've got the very person sitting in the front here, Ainsley, who's from the University of Strathclyde, where it's being rolled out at the moment, and we've just got the first evaluation results in from students who are actually also members of staff or faculty at that university. So I think they're more cynical than the younger students might be, but it's not overwhelmingly positive. And really, we need to delve into it in much more detail. But that could just be because there wasn't enough data being fed into it yet. It could be because the tool could be enhanced. It could be because they're adult learners and faculty already. They're kind of cynical about that, and they feel threatened perhaps by their students having access to more data. So there are so many variables here that it's quite difficult to draw definite conclusions. Simon.
Okay, let's thank Neil.
I mean, when Doug and I said there isn't very much evidence, as Bart pointed out, that doesn't mean there's no evidence. There are things that are beginning to work. There are things that are working. We can't roll those out without ethical procedures in place. Now that we're developing driverless cars, people are beginning to think about the ethics of driverless cars. We haven't got any out on the motorways at the moment, but if we have them in 5 years' time, we need to have thought it through. And also, we're in education. These are things that people, students, teachers should be thinking through. When I was giving a presentation on the ethics of MOOCs at one point, Somebody pointed me towards a set of terms of service for a game. In the terms of service, it said, I consent to hand over my soul to the developers of this game. Right? Hundreds, thousands of people had ticked, yeah, I'm happy with that. Now, some of them may not have been religious, they might not have cared, but I'm willing to bet that some of them cared deeply, but just hadn't read it. And so one of the things that we as educators are doing is saying, hang on, people can do things with your data, think about it, take a minute, pause, and read the terms and conditions.
Okay, let's take one more there.
Yeah. So actually, sort of maybe on that, I was actually wondering more, what if it goes from the other direction where students have an expectation that the institution is going to be doing something with their data to support their learning? Then what's the imperative, for us if we don't act in that regards? And more importantly, then how do we assure them that if we do take action, that it's effective?
Yeah.
Just repeat the question.
Yeah. So you're saying no. What's student expectation that, given that we do know stuff about them, we should be acting on it, and wouldn't they get cross if we didn't?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of where we were coming from, I suppose. If we know stuff and we think it could be helpful, we should be acting on it and thinking about all the ways around and the blocks and trying to overcome them. So, yeah, absolutely. I think in the original survey that we did that underpinned the OU policy, that was one of the views that was coming up. On the one hand, don't look at my stuff, it's mine, hands off. On the other hand, but you know all this about me, why aren't you doing more to save me? So a lot of conflict there, and it's a very complicated subject with no single answer, I don't think. But absolutely, as soon as students know more about what we could be doing, they'll expect us to be doing it for sure. Yeah.
Okay, choose somebody, Rebecca.
At the back.
Yeah, so if you, with this app, etc., okay, so your students are tracking you, and they say suddenly they realise through their app, they're going to the library less in their cohort, they're not clicking on the learning material on Blackboard or Canvas so much, they do it more, suddenly they're ahead of their app, and they didn't get a 2-1 off first, they come to me and say, sir, look at my app, I improved on that better than average, I still bombed out, I still got a 2-2, my life's over, I hate you. Where's the legal aspect of that? How sure are you in providing that app that you're just not giving them proxies for them to feel better?
Yeah, that's certainly something we've...
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the question was if students use an app and it predicts that they're going to do well and then they don't do so well in the final...
Well, no, it's just the behaviours. They start exhibiting some of the behaviours which they can measure, okay? And obviously, I guess there's some link between going to the library more apps or clicking on the site on Blackboard or what have you. And they're doing that, and they're still not getting the result they want. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's it is sort of evidence you've actually quantified that now in some way. And they
Yep.
can come back to me and say, "Sir, I did what you told the app said this. My life's still over."
Yeah, so quantifying activity doesn't map on necessarily to good performance. Yeah, I think this is part of an education, some educating we'll have to do of our students and our staff and faculty that analytics is not truth, and certainly predictions are not truth, and that correlation doesn't equal causation either. And hopefully these things are helpful, but you can't take them as the gospel truth. Anyone want to add to that?
No. No, we totally can't. No, we can't.
Choose.
I think that in some cases there is a cultural bias. So in some countries, receiving criticism is okay. So you consider it as a positive way in order to improve yourself. In others, it's not such a good thing. But also, in education, we have another bias that is, okay, teachers looking at students is okay. But how we would feel if suddenly our students are monitoring us, and we are evaluated by our students, and suddenly we are saying, okay, teacher, you performed well last week, you see. So it could be very controversial. And maybe the feeling would, in many cases, maybe we could be much more careful, because it's like, this kind of stuff I really don't like, that my students know what kind of parents I have in Facebook. But we are trying, on the other hand, to use their data from Facebook, in some cases, for instance, in order to better understand their learning process. But we are not considering it as a way in order to improve our teaching style and being monitored by others. So I think that many cases, this is not very well taken into consideration.
Do you want to repeat the question?
So I think there were two aspects to that question. The first one was the cultural aspect. In some countries, learners are happy to receive criticism, see that as part of the learning process. In other cultures, this may be more problematic. They have other ways of learning. And the other one is let's turn this on its heads. We're talking about how happy are learners with having their data collected. How happy are teachers with having their learning, with their figures collected? And when we came out of the keynote this morning, Paul said to me, oh, it's interesting to see that the students were wired up, but the teacher wasn't wired up at all. So if you see learning as a two-way process, which involves some teaching, why wasn't the teacher wired up? I think this is something we've seen at the Open University as well, when we were beginning to pull the data together as a team of data wranglers. One of the things that the educator was very worried about is, are you using that for performance management? You know, is this going to come back and bite us because we're not willing to be involved if that's the case? Now, if the educators are worried, how much more so should the learners be?
I agree. Yeah.